Hello everyone and welcome to the second edition in our series of webinars in association with NetNumber. On behalf of everyone here at the ITP Tech Division, let me offer you all a very warm welcome. We've got a great session lined up for you today, which will explore opportunities for intergenerational signaling consolidation during the 5G era. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by a representative from one of Europe's biggest telcos today. With more than 184 million customers spread across Europe, Deutsche Telekom runs the full suite of both legacy and cutting-edge network generation services at various points across its footprint, encompassing everything from 2G to 5G services. I'm sure this keeps today's first panelist extremely busy, and it also means that he is ideally positioned to give us quite a unique insight today into our webinar topic. So let me hand you over briefly to Ulf Costa, Head of International Network Infrastructure for Intercarrier Voice and Signaling Wholesale Services at Deutsche Telekom, to briefly introduce himself. Ulf, it's great to have you with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, as Chris mentioned, my name is Ulf Costa, and together with my team, I'm in charge of the international intercarrier voice and signaling hub platforms. So we are the production unit for our telecom global carrier wholesale services. With around 27 billion international voice minutes per year and signaling traffic of more than 100,000 message signaling units per second on our platforms, we connect DT to the world and the world to Deutsche Telekom. So in this area, I drive the transformation of our intercarrier voice and signaling infrastructure for our international wholesale customers and partners. So with that, I give back to Chris.
Thanks very much, Ulf. We look forward to hearing plenty more from you throughout today's webinar. Our second guest today is NetNumber's CRO, Matt Rosenberg. Matt brings a huge array of experience to the role. NetNumber has over 240 international customers spread across the globe, and Matt brings deep knowledge of the telecom software industry, including complex solution sales expertise, and building delivery and service teams. Matt, it's great to have you with us. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts today and to picking your brains a little bit during our Q&A session at the end. I'll hand over to you now to briefly introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here again, and it's a privilege to be joining Ulf on this stage here. Having been with NetNumber now for 13 years, we've seen a lot of changes in the carrier space and the industry as a whole. We see signaling, routing, security taking a whole new set of dimensions as we grow into the 5G era. NetNumber has been doing this for 20 years now, as you said, across 250 customers around the globe, and it's a privilege to be part of this industry expansion. So thank you for the time today.
It's entirely our pleasure. Thanks very much, Matt. Okay, in a moment, I'll hand you over to our moderator for today, Patrick Donegan, founder and principal analyst at HardenStance, to begin today's discussion. Before I do that, however, just let me mark your card that we will be concluding today's webinar with a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions for our panelists that come to mind over the course of the webinar, please do send them in to us via the chat function, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. Right, without any further ado, let me pass you over to our moderator for today, Patrick, to begin today's discussion. Patrick, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So to introduce the subject matter, I'm going to take us through an introduction around what we mean by the subject matter of the webinar. What do we mean by intergenerational? What do we mean by signaling consolidation? And what do we mean by the 5G era? So in terms of intergeneration, we're talking fundamentally about mobile generations, 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G, but we're also talking about fixed networks as well. From a signaling perspective, we know that 2G and 3G and 4G traffic all look very, very different. 2G traffic is largely voice and text. Once we've got into the 4G and 5G eras, we have far, far greater volumes of data, far greater volumes and varieties of application traffic. And in terms of that sort of balance between 2G and 4G, we know that 3G represents something of a sort of midpoint between the two. When we get to 5G, particularly with the 5G standalone era, which is coming in the second half of this year, we know that changes further in terms of the way that the 5G core gets broken up, and in terms of the introduction down the line of HTTP2 as a new signaling standard. As an industry, we're expecting the growth in connected IoT things to go through the roof in the course of the next few years. If you look at the balance of connections, the technologies that are connecting IoT things today, it's actually just coming up on the 2G and 3G share of those connections is just only recently come down to around about 50%. We can expect that to reduce further to 40, 30, 20%, but that's obviously going to take place over time. These changes obviously impact an operator's internal traffic within their own network in the first instance, but over time, obviously, that has a knock-on effect on its interconnection traffic and the pattern of signaling across that environment. What do we mean by signaling consolidation? We're referring here to different signaling platforms. So most operators today will have distinct SS7 signaling platforms for 2G and 3G, and then diameter for 4G. The operators, most of them also have a whole lot of critical databases that are needed in the network to interact with those signaling and routing platforms. That could be the equipment identity register, that could be various numbering platforms, subscriber profile data, QoS data, that kind of thing. Most of these, or in many cases, many of these platforms are standalone, isolated platforms. So it gets pretty messy in there for most operators. Also, when we think of consolidation, we can think of vendor consolidation. You might have noticed that SS7 isn't terribly sexy these days. It's actually, it's a legacy platform. Not too many people are taking training courses. And actually, from a vendor perspective, you can actually see that the trend has been for vendors to exit support of SS7 over the next few years. So operators are going to require vendors that support all of those legacy signaling standards, as well as the future-looking ones that speak to 5G. What do we mean by the 5G era? We're primarily talking about the transformational opportunities of the next 5 years. Operators are going to need hyper-efficient networks with a high level of automation. Our contention as a group here is that you're not going to be able to support that if you're conceiving, deploying, and operating 5G in its own silo. Those opportunities are really only going to be exploited properly if you're able to streamline and consolidate as many of your software-driven network functions across 5G and all of your other legacy 4G, 3G, 2G, and potentially fixed networks as well. So, over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to look at 5 different discussion points around this topic. We're going to look at what is the risk of maintaining multiple different platforms in your signaling core. What is the case for consolidating all of those platforms into a single signaling core environment? I'll invite our speakers to make that case, but I'll also push back on them a little bit and ask them to look at alternatives. We're going to look at lifecycle management. How do you support an environment in which your legacy platforms are supported, your legacy hardware-driven environment, your NFV-driven environment, and increasingly upcoming, your cloud-native environment? When you're supporting all of those environments contiguously, how do you go about doing that? We're going to also look at the way that you can centralize data and optimizing routing off of the back of that environment. Why would you do that? How are you going to do that? And lastly, we're going to look at how you actually execute some of those transformations. In a software-driven environment, that's relatively straightforward. I refer to those as sort of blood transfusions. But when you're migrating, when you're trying to get out of legacy hardware-driven environments and you're looking at a forklift of some of your old SS7 kit, that's the beating heart of the network. So what evidence do we have from our guests that this can actually be done smoothly and elegantly and in a non-disruptive way from the perspective of the end users? So I'm now going to start with the very first of our discussion points here, and that's on signaling opportunity and risk, looking at maintaining platforms. Let's think about an operator with the characteristics described that are described here, are they? No, they're not. I do apologize. That's my misunderstanding. Okay, we're going to assume an operator that has, as I described previously, an SS7 in diameter signaling core. They've got a bunch of siloed databases that I referred to earlier. And at some point down the road, 5G is going to be rolled out with HTTP2, etc. So I'm going to ask you in the first instance, Ulf. You work for the part of Deutsche Telekom that provides the interconnection services. Share with us what happens if you maintain dedicated signaling cores and siloed databases. What is the risk of that? I mean, telcos have managed perfectly well doing that up until now. At what point and why does that become non-viable, would you say?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for asking the question. Looking back to the legacy times, for each of those service productions, we are dedicated, separated platforms. So that means the teams had to work with different platforms, different maintenance specifications and contracts, and even with different and multiple tools to ensure an overall system monitoring on that. By not taking the challenges and the chances, let's say, of going the technology transformation, we, from my point of view, would risk three major opportunities. What is simplification and harmonization, to reduce legacy features and take out the complexities. Increase efficiency and automation, so reducing manual workload by a high degree of process automation. And last but not least, ensuring the future proofing. So from my point of view, target platforms need to be capable to enable future design and features like cloud native solutions that goes beyond of the current scope.
Okay, thank you, Ulf. Matt, what would you care to add to that?
Well, I think Ulf put some really salient points there. As we see carriers struggle with a silo approach in their network, what we typically see the problems lie around are handling multiple protocols that speak different languages and have to access different databases. The legacy factor of some of these platforms being in the network for many, many years, so they have a performance issue or they have a feature capabilities that aren't there because the demands in the network are growing quite rapidly. So as carriers think about reducing operating costs, they look for efficiencies they could gain, such as a common operating system for a centralized platform that handles multiple domains, a platform that can speak multiple languages in order to facilitate multiple different types of requests in order to return a routing decision. And so as Ulf elaborated, the harmonization of these multiple domains onto a centralized platform really provide a step-up function in terms of efficiency as well as reducing internal signaling surge.
When you mention speaking multiple languages, Matt, are you referring to multiple different signaling protocols, or are you referring to other languages, other types of language?
No, exactly that. So think MAP, CAML, LDAP, diameter, SIP, EMIN, and all the different variants that are out there of each one of those.
Across the signaling platforms and the databases as well, right?
Right. It's like the United Nations. Everyone speaks a different language, but they have to come together into a centralized function. Right.
Ulf, you'll recognize the nature of the conversations that go on in a telco. You know, there is a strong case. You've got a piece of kit in there. It works. You know, it may be a bit weak on features, but it works. And there's a temptation to say, look, just leave it alone. Don't touch it. We can get another 3 years out of it. Let's sweat as much as we can out of that asset. At what point, what is the tipping point where a telco has to go, you know what, we're just going to have to write that off? What's the tipping point?
Well, furthermore, I would say, do you think it is an early morning decision, like taking a shower and decide to start with a new future-proof model? Of course, it's not. Yeah. So it is a process, and these kind of process need some kind of a relevant trigger to get focused on. For example, if you run a platform that gets more and more to the end of its service time, or it comes to the limits of further scale and growth potential, then this is a trigger to really think about technology transformation. Yeah? Another triggering point might also be the services being produced by itself, e.g. by forcing migrations from the legacy to the new world, also from the service perspective, and from the solutions. So at the end, I just see three major key requirements behind such a technology transformation. It's customer and business, it's innovation and future proven, and of course it's costs and the TCO.
Ulf, can I ask you just to clarify, you talked about a trigger being services being produced by itself. Can I ask you just to clarify what you meant by that?
Yeah, you know, looking in the past, we had a lot of TDM services running across. Certainly we were focusing on going IP only on that. So that comes to the point that you do not need the production capabilities for TDM any longer, right? So that can be one of those trigger points, I mean.
Right. So Matt, Ulf gave us a bunch of trigger points. I suspect you will have seen others amongst your customer base. Can you maybe just give us an example or two of additional trigger points that you've seen?
Sure. I think Ulf pinpointed some great ones. End of life, end of capacity, lack of features relevant to consumer demand. The other areas that we see carriers really call us in to look at a transformative process is when there are multiple sets of services that have to be delivered at a given time. And so we see carriers undertaking many different types of projects all across their network. So there's an opportunity play that carriers sometimes look at that says, well, if I'm going to do these 2 or 3 projects now, I might as well embed this other one in there as well and get it done at the same time. And so there's an opportunistic time frame that they look at doing. And the reasons that Ulf mentioned are pretty much the cornerstones behind those trigger points.
But that last use case you mentioned, that involves everybody and everybody making sure they talk to each other within the organization, right?
No doubt. And I think that the onset of IT technologies and the merging of core network management with IT in some carriers plays a part of that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's move to our second discussion point. And we're going to look here at signaling consolidation environments. Ulf, you're going to give us a bit of a chat, a bit of a talk with respect to Deutsche Telekom's experience.
Yeah, let me focus on my home turf here, what is the intercarrier service production, of course. And I already talked about my view on technology transformation and the different trigger points to get started, right? So let me give you a bit more insights of our journey in that arena here. So actually, my journey in that field started exactly at the point when our legacy signaling platform had been well utilized, yeah, but not scaling anymore and not being capable to support the growth rates that we were seeing even in the 2G, 3G signaling for international roaming. So traffic growth and business continuity were the two main drivers, in addition to the end of life and to a high cost run rate we had. So it was then the right time to take the decision going a new approach, going for a purely software-based solution. And that was the time when we introduced NetNumber's Titan STP solution. Yeah. And I can tell you at the beginning, it was very challenging. However, by running a deep solution review and ensuring a close collaboration during the migration path, we achieved our goal and modernized our signaling production environment by transforming it to a software-based solution. So the next step then was the introduction of the so-called cluster architecture, where we could use now different services and ensuring the real-time accounting on dedicated edges. What also brought us to a higher level of stability for the production environment and gave us the confidence in also adding the number portability database solution on top of the Titan implementation. With that, we increased the scale for our number portability elements. We increased the speed and the flexibility in regard to interface diversity. For our internal number triggering, to ensure the direct and efficient routing. Yeah. Even though we are using an independent solution for our voice routing function, the interworking is important on that. And in our case, the interworking works very well. The next step then, when we had that implemented, was the closer discussions with our operations teams, with our DevOps teams, yeah, to provide them with a good tool approach. So that was for us also the reason to look deeper into the EMS system, so the management system, what has been introduced to support our core workflows in the international signaling arena. Yeah. So again, the journey started with 2G, 3G signaling, had been preceded with number portability solutions and the EMS system. Yeah. And of course, from my perspective, that will not be the end yet.
Very good. Thanks, Ulf. Let me just ask a couple of questions before I come to Matt, if I may. First of all, you said, for those people who are listening, contemplating this journey, you said something huge. You said at the beginning, it was very challenging. Give us a couple of ideas as to, I'm sure there are many more than a couple, but just give us a couple of high level ideas of what the difficulties and challenges and obstacles were at the outset.
Yeah, certainly we are talking here about the SDP. We're talking about the heart of the network. Yeah,
right.
And all the teams, all the experts were really used to the legacy system. Yeah, they were working on that for years, and that we are coming to decide moving on and going an approach for a purely software-based solution. Yeah, also with a vendor, but on that point of time, let's say, was rather small than belonging to the big guys, right? Of the vendor market, let's say.
Yeah.
So it was really new in way of how to collaborate, how to bring the service up and running, to look into the stability of the platform itself, into the architecture. So that was what I meant with challenging times.
Right. I think it's probably fair, it has to be fair to say that inevitably the Deutsche Telekom is one of the world's leading carriers. And actually, the pain that you went through, you are bound to be one of the very first carriers to have gone through that type of pain. And therefore, Matt, I would assume that, from those learnings, you're able to execute things with a good deal less pain nowadays with new customers compared with what you experienced with Deutsche Telekom, right?
Sure, there's no doubt about that. The partnership that we've created with Deutsche Telekom has been nothing less than spectacular and special. And there's a lot of joint learning between both organizations during this process. From our perspective as a vendor, when carriers move from pure hardware to software, there's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration. That was a learning process for us. From Deutsche Telekom's point of view, I think I could say confidently it's the same thing. Moving from a large vendor to a small vendor, there are new methodologies and processes that are different than they're used to. And so there was a mutual set of learning, but as Ulf alluded to, at the end, the result was absolute perfection, and something that I think both organizations are very proud of.
One other point I'd like to pick up, if I may, Ulf, you used the phrase, very important phrase, but I think there may be some that would require it being explained. You referred to moving to real-time accounting on dedicated edges. Tell us what that means, if you would.
Right. So that is the general, I would say, NetNumber architecture, and of course, Matt can give even more insights on that from a vendor perspective. But that means that we do have central elements where the Titan core is working, and below that we have different edges. And those of the different edges, we are producing, for example, the SDP functionality. On other edges, we are producing the number portability functionality. And right. Even on other edges, we are producing and we taking care of the real-time accounting, yeah, to really ensure that we have the relevant accounting data in the platform, yeah, to bill our customers at the end.
Right. And I'm going to ask just one last question on this subject. And it's, this is a question that's as old as the telecom industry, and it goes, there are pros and cons to multi-vendor versus single vendor. When you move to single vendor, there's a lot more invested in that relationship. From a certain perspective, there is more risk. How did you arrive at the conclusion that the benefits of single vendor outweighed the risk?
Well, of course, generally it is a decision you have to take. You're either going for multi-vendor approach or reducing complexity and focusing on simplification by deciding for one vendor approach. So in our cases, I can say that we are going a hybrid model here. Yeah, focusing on the layers. We are clearly preferring a single vendor approach. But for different layers, we have different solutions and vendors in place. So
right.
that keeps a door open, yeah, and gives flexibility. And of course, there are different possibility to mitigate the risk of dependency and crisis situation, e.g., in regard to vendor instability or so. But that I would like to leave with our legal and procurement department.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's move then to a brief discussion about lifecycle management. As you've alluded to, many carriers have, legacy hardware-driven products in their infrastructure. Most have moved to an NFV model at some point over the course of the last few years. And now the very leading ones are beginning with cloud native, and that's going to become more prevalent over time. So there are different life cycles of hardware and software in those three models. From your perspective, how does life cycle management exist in a single vendor environment?
Yeah, well, so of course, looking into the future technology transformation and the needs on flexibility regarding scale in, scale out scenarios, then certainly I expect that the vendors ahead of our needs and requirements. That very much also counts for lifecycle management. The software solution based on bare metal might be a good starting point. So the vendor needs to be ready in producing the solutions on bare metal and on VMs. Yeah, that for me is a basis. I also would like to see the vendor being ready for container-based and cloud-native approach. And of course, I need to see it in a hybrid approach. So being capable for private and public cloud applications here.
Right. Okay. Matt, I rather suspect you're going to say you can do all that, aren't you?
Of course, Patrick.
Tell us a little bit more.
So, of course. So I think as we look at the world, we get a nice broad view, and I think we'll fit a couple important points there. I think first, carriers will move on their own pace, and every carrier is different, and that's based upon region, about size, et cetera, et cetera. And so as carriers look to choose new products and innovative products, one of their decision points should be, does the vendor's solution allow me to consume the technology at my own pace? And that also then further predicates a progression, whether it's COTS hardware, whether it's a virtualized environment with a hypervisor like VMware, for example, or KVM, or this move to cloud native architecture. In either one of those cases, the use of cloud is really important. And cloud has many different definitions depending on who you talk to. There's private cloud, there's public cloud, there's hybrid cloud, and there's cloud native. So these things mean different things to different people. Products that take advantage of offering services from the cloud back into the core are important, depending upon where they are on the network. Services that need to have a private cloud infrastructure are important, again, depending upon where it is in the network with security and firewalls. A hybrid version of that, where the core network needs to reach out to the cloud to get a service to come back in. And then, of course, there's cloud native architecture. The move to 5G will predicate a disposition to having a cloud native architecture that has orchestration, that is container based, as well as some level of automation and human intervention combined together. We've spent 20 years building nothing but software products. We don't build anything that's based on hardware. And so by nature of that, all of those scenarios I've outlined, our products and services handle any one of those scenarios at any time.
Right. Ulf, let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say Deutsche Telekom is as an organization in terms of its cloud native migration? On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say you are? You're not going to say 10, I'm sure.
So let me answer your question with some words beforehand. In regard to our international inter-carrier infrastructure, we are still at the beginning phase. We have already made first experiences with cloud native based network function installations, and certainly are proceeding with this approach further on. However, as we are not talking of any greenfield approach, we need to go along the migration path. And as the NT world so far was very different from the IT world, we do see operational challenges to overcome.
So you're going to give me a 1 to 10 number, or not really? Is it a 3 or 4?
As I said, we're in the inter-carrier side. We are at the beginning.
So 2.
Let's give them a 2 here, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. 3 if we're being generous. Okay. Matt, well, I mean, the interesting thing there, I think, is, if Deutsche Telekom's inter-carrier business is at a 2 or 3, I think we have to speculate that, an awful lot of carriers are probably at a 1 or a 0.5 even. Matt, what about from a vendor perspective? Where would you say NetNumber is on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of being able to deliver software according to a cloud native model?
That's a good question. So we just released our latest platform announcement called Titanium, which will be due out at the end of this year. At that time, we'll be certainly closer to a 10, somewhere around an 8.5 to a 9. But again, it's predicated along are the carriers going to be ready. In Ulf's case, he's got a progression to go from 2 to 10, and that will take a little bit of time. So, as I said earlier, I think having solutions that allow consumers to digest that technology at their own pace is important. And we'll see a phased migration. We'll see move from virtualization to maybe cloud native with containers. Then we'll see some level of automation where software is delivered directly into a lab through a CI/CD type of service. Then we'll see more testing become automated between both parties in a virtualized environment, et cetera, et cetera. That will take time. And I think it's important to realize that it is okay to take the time. This is not going to be everyone switches the light switch and then is ready for cloud native.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, between an 8.5 and a 9 by year end, that's pretty hot stuff, I would think. Yep. Let's ask one more question in relation to lifecycle management. So when you're running, different hardware and software life cycles concurrently, that changes the kind of commercial dynamics between an operator and a vendor, specifically in terms of software license management. Ulf, how would you like that software license management model to evolve with that lifecycle management that we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. License management, from my point of view, will be the key element in software-based, virtualized, and cloudified solutions. And the classical lifecycle management approach might come to its limits here, but this license management is a key element. And being capable in proceeding the technology transformation path, it is essential to have a very flexible license management. The licenses need to be able to transfer between different services supported by a vendor based on the dynamic traffic development. And of course, I do expect from the vendor that the licenses model are also supporting the technology development path. Yeah, software-based, bare metal, as I said, going to virtual machines, going to cloud native, etc. Therefore, flexibility for me is a key element in this regard.
Right. So, Matt, are you as flexible as Ulf wants you to be?
Of course we are, Patrick. Ulf has experienced that already. But I think Ulf makes some good points. And I think there is a distinction here. There's products and there's services. And so licensing or modules in that effect will take different forms. Today, for example, carriers in their procurement side of the house still produce budgets as a CapEx spend majority. As we move towards new cloud native architecture, there is going to be a level of continuous service. And so a more subscription-based license model will probably come into play at some level within the entire solution. But Ulf is absolutely right. We're going to see, and we are seeing that now, requests from carriers asking for enterprise type of license models, where it's encompassing a broader portfolio of features and functionality. It's more transferable, but with that comes other opportunities, and that is really around the services side of the architecture.
It's interesting to hear you make that affirmation around moving to an enterprise licensing model. That's what that's a lot of what the 5G, realizing the opportunity of 5G is in part dependent on that in some way, I would think. So that's really interesting. Okay, let us move to the next discussion point, where we are going to be talking here about optimized routing, leveraging centralized signaling data. And what I wondered if you could start us off here, Ulf, just give us a sense from a carrier's perspective of, what price do you pay if you're routing traffic inefficiently? What price do you pay either in terms of performance and user experience, or in terms of the operator's own OPEX and CAPEX costs? What's the price of inefficient routing?
Let me fly in from that perspective by saying certainly to ensure optimal routing, we are using number portability functionalities, and the decision regarding countries we are triggering is a business-related one. So the suboptimal routing may lead to quality and customer experience impacts. To offer high-quality services, dedicated direct routing is an essential topic here. And the using number portability capabilities, that enables us also to directly dig into the end-to-end services in case we see any quality challenges. And you also mentioned about the cost aspect. So looking to the costs, then number portability plays also in that arena an important role, specifically in those cases where pricing termination costs are based on porting status.
Are based on what? Can you repeat that again?
Based on the porting status that you really terminate directly.
Yeah. Okay. Matt, I think you're going to give us a little use case type discussion point here, aren't you?
Sure. So looking at one of our customers, they're a pan-European telco. They experienced some pretty large challenges in their signaling core as it related to routing decisions. And the key reason that they had some challenges is they built a wide range of databases that were disparate. They were single silo. And as they grew the network, multiple different types of applications or network functions had to reach out and talk to these multiple databases to get information to make a routing decision. As time moved on, they expanded the network. There was more and more demand internally on these old legacy databases. And it presented a large problem for them in terms of capacity, performance, accuracy, and growth capability. So what do I mean by these databases? There's actually a wide range of them that was problematic for them. It was number portability. It was subscriber profile. It was QoS. It was prepaid data, et cetera, et cetera. And there was about 10 of them. And so what they, back to the old comment about a trigger point, what the trigger point came for them was when the signaling surges in the network became too dramatic and latency seemed to be a major issue. And so where we go from there is the carrier deployed NetNumber's Titan centralized signaling routing engine. The first step they did was to migrate all of the databases into the centralized platform. So we created a baseline layer of centralized data that was normalized. The next step was all of the network elements were able to query into this centralized routing engine over any protocol that they wanted. So whether it was a legacy protocol like MAP or Camel, a newer protocol like SIP or Diameter, it didn't matter. That allowed the carrier ultimate flexibility to grow the network with new services. They could add an element at any time that spoke any language, but more importantly, deprecate these older databases and significantly reduce both latency as well as operating costs. It was a fantastic result. Today, they keep on and continuing adding new elements, new services, and rely on the centralized operational facility within the Titan signaling platform.
So Matt, you talked about a platform that can speak those multiple protocols to all of those different databases. What are the types of protocols we're talking about here? A lot of folks may not be familiar with them.
Sure. It really spans the whole intergenerational play from 2G all the way up to 5G. So you think legacy, you want to think LDAP, Camel, MAP, INAP. If you think 3G, 4G, you want to think enum, SIP, Diameter. And as we move towards 5G, you want to think HTTP2, etc. And so it really spans a very wide range. And even within those protocols, you have multiple variations.
Right, indeed. Okay. Great stuff. Thanks, Matt. Let's move then to the last of our discussion points. And what I wanted to talk about here was it's in the context of the different types of lifecycle management, the legacy of hardware-based deployments, the more recent model of NFV, and the upcoming cloud-native model. When you're making change-outs in purely software, I think of that as kind of blood transfusions, if you like. And that depending on your NFV model, that's applicable. Certainly the cloud-native model is something like that. But for a lot of carriers beginning from that sort of legacy environment, lifting out, forklifting an STP, for example, and replacing it, you know, that, as I think Ulf mentioned earlier, is the heartbeat of the network. How on earth do you assure ripping and replacing those old STPs without disrupting the performance and without disrupting the user experience? So, Ulf, your experience in Deutsche Telekom, what were some of the critical factors that determined that you've been able to pull that off without any major disruption?
Yeah, of course, it is like a heart transplant. Yeah, the STP function is the heart of the network. And when deciding to go the way and replacing the legacy STPs, the fundamental element is that you are setting up the future approach and ensuring a stable environment, by running all relevant test cases, and specifically the stress and the load tests are essential to mention. So that was, in our case, a very clear way we proceeded to really ensure that what we are building up is in a stable situation before we are going to migrate any of those services. Yeah, and to ensure this kind of stability. Here, I would like to mention also that the collaboration with the vendor is playing a key role. Yeah, to have full support with direct contacts into the entire vendors organization. That is really supporting such a big move.
Right, Matt. I mean, Ulf touched on a number of things that were important to in Deutsche Telekom's case. I assume that's going to be also relevant to many other operators. But what are some other aspects, key things that you have to get right to ensure that those types of forklifts are effectively done?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things. First, I think it's a very methodical approach in regards to transforming the network and replacing the heartbeat, if you will. So you have to come prepared with a very deep set of processes as well as checks and balance systems. Second, you require deep subject matter expertise. And so given the fact that at NetNumber, as an example, we span all generations of technology from 2G to 5G, we invest heavily with our people as subject matter expertise on the 3G side, the legacy side, the data side, the diameter side, and the future IT infrastructure side. Third, I think it takes a very collaborative approach, being on site or present all the time. Given the way the world is moving now, I think you can still accomplish that by having very deep interaction remotely. But what we've seen in the past is a requirement to have someone on site or dedicated for 6, 10, 12 months, or however long the project is deemed to take, in order to be that one-stop shop for the carrier, so that they can have full confidence that this project has full visibility and full focus from the vendor.
Right, that's nicely put. I think in terms of the core discussion points we wanted to have, I think that's a wrap. So I'm going to hand back to Chris.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Patrick. I can't really believe we've sped through that so quickly. It seemed like it was gone in a flash. There's plenty of good points for our viewers to be mulling over there. We have lots of questions coming in, which is always a good sign. So we'll now just spend the next 10 minutes or so. I'll just put as many of these questions to you guys as we can. So our first question comes from Sam Munro. It's actually a very topical question at the moment, not only for those of us here in the Middle East, but for everyone across Europe and the rest of the world too. And it ties in with I saw that the UAE government had announced this week that it was planning to switch off 2G services by the end of 2022. So in the fixed line sector, particularly in Europe, there's a big move towards a defined switch off date for legacy copper networks. I'm wondering whether you guys think something similar would be beneficial in the mobile space as well. So Sam's question is, should regulatory bodies such as the European Commission be implementing a mandatory 2G or 3G switch off date? And I'm going to come to you, Matt, first.
Sure. Well, it's an interesting concept. It's been debated a lot in many different regions. If I look at where we see our carriers' readiness and where the workloads are being implemented, and the other external factors of resource, subject matter expertise, funding, revenue streams within a carrier's network, I think it's a daunting task to mandate that in any quick time period. I think there is certainly an element where, as a regulatory body, they want to implement new technologies and innovations into the society, and that's a betterment as we go forward and move forward. But I think there is a lot of logistical planning and real-world pressures that have to take into consideration before any such mandate would come down to every single carrier.
Okay, I mean, I guess here in the Middle East as well, it's a lot easier for them to say they're going to switch off their 2G services because, you know, they're coming a lot later in the game, and a lot of their networks are a lot sort of have been deployed more recently, so they don't have so much legacy architecture in place as maybe we do in Europe, maybe we do in the States as well. Patrick, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure that a mandate is the right approach. I mean, different countries have gone in different directions. The Australians have already switched off, from what I understand. I think that the US is on the way to doing that as well. It's going to depend very much, I think, on the different markets. I mean, if you mentioned UAE, but yes, a little later to market, but it's also a geographically quite small market, and that's also a factor in all these things. If you look at the way that the operators run their networks now, there's an awful lot of single RAN handling multiple generations, and that means that the sort of switch off is less clunky. Less of a hardware-based, action than it needed to be. So a lot of operators are keeping their cards close to their chest where this is concerned. So I think it's, for a lot of operators, it's the next 3 to 5 years. For some, it's longer. And a minority have already gone. But I wouldn't have thought a regional mandate was appropriate. Different operators have different customer bases, different legacies, etc.
Sure. So it's really a case of letting operators decide when they're ready to switch off that legacy equipment and proceed with moving everything up to 3G, 4G, and 5G.
Yeah,
okay, great. We'll move on to our second question, which comes in from Faisal Kanfar. And this will be to all three of you. In your opinion, is it possible to over-automate a network? Is the end goal complete AI-driven automation, or do we want to retain an element of manual intervention in the management of our networks? And additionally to that, does that present any security challenges? Ulf, would you like to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, let me take a step on to that approach. So automation certainly is one of the drivers, one of the trigger points as well. What I mentioned, we don't want to miss going that path. We are not at the stage of talking about over automation. So let's make the first step first, and then think how far we are coming along here. Yeah, and of course, security, specifically in cloud environments, security is a key topic. That's for sure. Yeah.
Great, Patrick. Anything for you to add on that point?
Yeah, I think it's what any carrier will do is they'll figure out their comfort level with respect to automation, and they'll automate just a little bit in front of that. They won't push that to the edge. They'll take whatever their comfort level is and automate just a smidgen in front. From a security perspective, it's good and bad depending on how you implement it. I mean, if you can carry out a security update across your network at the push of a button in an automated manner, that's absolutely fantastic. If, however, you're using automated processes to automate the proliferation of malware throughout your network, that's not such a good thing. So it's really, there's great potential, but it has to be done in the right way and with the right constraints.
Matt, what's your take on this from the vendor point of view? Obviously, AI is going to be a huge driver in everything that you guys are looking to for the future. Can you overdo it?
I agree with both of the comments so far. I think there is a risk, and carriers want to mitigate that risk. The risk is if you make fully dependent on automation and you remove human intervention in decision-making process, you run the risk, as one example, as Patrick mentioned, you automate and propagate problems across your network that you can't control. Now, other architectures like containers can help mitigate some of those risks. But in general, what we see and what we're being requested from our carriers is a hybrid approach. Automate as much as you can up to the point that I get the data in order to make the decision, then hit another button to propagate and automate some functions and services.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to our third question. This comes from Nadia Altoon. So Matt, I know you touched a little bit earlier on the role of cloud native architecture. Nadia would like to know, how important is the move towards cloud native architecture, and how will it redefine network capabilities, and what challenges will it pose? So Matt, if I come to you, seeing as you mentioned that during your discussion earlier.
Sure. Well, I think there's just a general push for new innovation and new methodologies within the core network. And so as carriers would like to get better lifecycle management, they'd like to get better access to larger consumer markets and proliferating more data at faster rates down to the subscribers and the mobile phones. They'd like to get better orchestration within the network. They'd like to remove legacy demand that is constraining some of the signaling in the core network. The move to cloud native architecture is going to be vital. Now, if you want to get 5G into your network, the 3GPP architecture, the way they've built 5G, is predicated on having a cloud network architecture. So there is a little bit of dependency going on with the move towards 5G as it brings into new changes in the carrier's network as a requirement rather than a nice to have. And so if you want to go to the future, if you want to bring in IT type of technology with IT type of service levels and performance, the move to cloud native is going to be required.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. Ulf, did you have anything to add to that? From your perspective, how's cloud native going to affect things?
Yeah, I agree in general to that what Matt already stated to that question. In addition to that, so cloud native is a way forward, yeah, and of course, in regard to flexibility, in regard to acting more flexible on, let's say, dedicated events, what might lead to more traffic or even also to less traffic in the network. So taking that kind of flexibility is much easier in a cloud native approach than it is in a bare metal approach.
Thanks very much, Ulf. And Patrick, just to give this sort of this question a slight sort of regional angle, if I can, are there any areas of the world that you think are particularly proactive in terms of their approach to cloud native, or does it depend much more on a sort of operator to operator basis?
I think it would probably be fair to say that the US is relatively advanced with respect to cloud native for sure. One or two European carriers. I don't know with certainty, but I would assume that Deutsche Telekom is at or about the leading edge. But I would think the US carriers are probably that little bit advanced relative to others. That would be my expectation.
Perfect. All right, guys, thank you very much. Ulf, I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in that I saw come in, and I thought of you when I saw it. Can you share the most common underlying infrastructure required by the industry in the last year, whether that's for new signaling nodes or replacement of existing STP or DSC?
So I think there are two ways. As we were starting on a software-based solution based on bare metal as a starting point, coming from the legacy world, we were certainly focusing on that approach, being stable, having that in place to make then in the second step the next move, into a virtualized and cloudified solution on that. So in general, I would say two elements have been very important if I look into that for our approach in the carrier world. One is software-based solutions, so based on bare metal, and the other one is putting on top of virtual machines, for example.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that just in general, carriers are going to move at their own pace. There's going to be multiple hybrid environments for some number of years before carriers get to cloud native, and that's just perfectly fine as an industry. I think vendors and the products that are offered by the vendors will continue to support that type of pace environment.
All right, thank you very much, guys. I feel like we could probably run through another 10 or 20 questions quite easily, but I think that's probably a good place to leave it because we're going to run out of time for today's session. I'm sure you'll agree it's been a really interesting discussion with plenty of food for thought for our viewers to take away today. I'd like to thank today's moderator, Patrick, for leading a lively discussion throughout, and to our two panelists for giving us their time today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our viewers and readers do as well. That's all we've got time for now, but do keep checking on the CommsMEA website for details of future webinars and industry events. We'll keep you posted. My thanks again to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. See you then.
Thank you. Bye-bye.